Mr. President, thank you very much for welcoming us into your house and for participating to this global conversation, a conversation which we hope will shed some light on some of the most crucial issues at the heart of India today. You're coming to Europe at a time when both India and the EU are grappling with great economic difficulties. We heard a lot about the euro crisis, but India's problems have taken us by surprise. You were supposed to be the future, the smart industrial powerhouse, one of the so-called BRICS countries. So what happened there?
First of all, I would like to express my views on this issue. I am fully aware of it because I myself was involved. When the crisis began, first financial crisis in 2008, I had to bear the additional responsibility of heading the finance ministry. Therefore, I had to face this problem. Indian GDP was growing at a fast rate of around 9% plus. But when I took over, I found out that there was almost a fortnightly basis sliding down of the GDP growth. From hindsight, we can say that we did not understand the depth of the crisis at that point of time. So immediately we had to rush, and like most other countries, we provided stimulus package. Frankly speaking, we could not recover from that shock. I am not talking of India, but also the whole world. Because the problem is at the root. And that root from, I think there is a commonality of the Eurozone, problems of Eurozone and ourselves, and most of the emerging countries and some of the developed countries also, that our borrowing is not matching our mobilization of the resources. It required radical reforms. Many of the European countries did it, even taking the risk. I salute them.
And do you think India will do that too?
India has already started doing it.
But there is more need for reforms, do you think?
It is because we shall have to, I am coming to that point, we shall have to also keep in mind the size of Indian population, the level of uneven development. Most of the advanced countries, their manufacturing sector is highly developed. But in India, we cannot afford to have that model because I am to feed 1.2 billion plus people. Therefore, I shall have to emphasize on agriculture. I shall have to emphasize on the development of rural India. But I do agree that in today's context, when the world is becoming economically integrated, and global economy is no longer a dream but a reality, we shall have to work collectively. But keeping in view the country-specific requirement.
And talking rightly about cooperation, the EU and India are strategic partners, and there is a free trade and investment agreement on the table since 2007. If it was completed, it would affect positively the lives of over 1.8 billion people.
Of course.
How do you think we can kickstart this fact?
What I want, of course, now I cannot directly respond or directly act on it, but my advice to my colleagues in the ministry would be that 15 rounds of negotiations have been completed. I was also closely monitoring it when I was in the Ministry of Finance. Large number of areas of agreement we have reached. There are only a very few areas of differences. We should narrow down those differences.
Are these areas that you still have to tackle? For example, the amount of red tape there is in India, or?
What I feel that there are certain areas, there is a conceptual difference. But I am not going into the nitty-gritty. What I want to emphasize that we must resolve and should reach the agreement sooner than later.
But you're coming for a cultural event as well, Europalia, this magnificent show of all what's Indian culture and arts.
Of course, India is the oldest civilization of the world. though as a nation state, our experiment is comparatively new. But India is the home of the oldest civilization.
You think of the Harappan, it goes back many.
And the essential ingredient of Indian civilizations is its plurality. Therefore, in this festival, which we are participating, we would like to convey the depth of our culture.
We heard a lot in the last 12 months about another issue, violence against women in India. Is the media, do you think, giving us the real picture, or there is another side to this story?
You know, one point is to be kept in mind. Some of these events are really disturbing. As an incident in December of the last year, many a times I have described that it shook the national conscience. But this media exposure, to a considerable extent, is because of the fact Indian women are normally shy, especially the rural women. And these type of events, they did not report it. But nowadays, these are being adequately reported. In one way, it is good, though for the time being it is projecting a distorted image of India. But what I can assure you, that all the measures which we have taken already and which we are contemplating, one of the basic objectives of our inclusive growth is empowerment. Empowerment of weaker sections, empowerment of women. In our local bodies, more than 3 million elected local representatives participate in the decision making. Right now, when I am speaking before you, more than 1.2 million chiefs, women chiefs of these local bodies, they are exercising their authority.
Yes, because that's a clue. You have to give women more clout, more education and more clout. But also men, don't men need to be re-educated a bit? Because maybe from schools they don't respect.
Absolutely needed. That is absolutely needed. Awareness building, education, creating consensus. And that's why I have coined a phrase and I have asked my countrymen to reset our moral compass.
After a decade of relative quiet, we have seen an increase of violence at the line of control with Pakistan. We know it's in the news, on the front page these days. And do you think you will see peace between Pakistan and India in your lifetime?
In 1971, when Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was Prime Minister of Pakistan, India entered into an agreement which is known as Simla Agreement. And in that Simla Agreement, India ceded all the occupied territories which Indian Army during the war. In our basic foreign policy, we do not have any territorial ambition. We do not have any ambition to export our ideology to any country, or we do not have any commercial interests. Because when I was foreign minister, more than often I used to say that I can change my friends if I like, but I can't change my neighbors if I like. I shall have to accept the neighbor where he is. He is my neighbor. Whether I like or not doesn't matter. Therefore, it is for me to decide whether I will live with my neighbor in tension or in peace. We opted for peace. But one point is to be understood. No country can compromise its territorial integrity. That is not possible. And second thing is terrorism. And terrorist activities must be curbed, and state-sponsored terrorism can never be acceptable.
India says that this is state-sponsored terrorism, and of course Pakistan says it's not state-sponsored terrorism.
No, it may not be, but non-state actors, that is the phrase they used. Then I responded by saying that non-state actors are not coming from heaven. Non-state actors are coming from territory under your control.
India is going to vote next spring. major general elections are coming up. I know you cannot talk about party politics in your position today, but you're a senior politician, you've seen so much of Indian politics. So can you tell me really briefly, what do you think are the key issues that are going to win or lose the elections?
Economic development, inclusive growth, maintenance of law and order, protection of internal security, and protection from external threat. So Indian electorate are fully aware of their responsibilities, and I am quite confident that they will exercise their rights very wisely.
And do you think it's important in this election to have a charismatic leader in order to win it?
Whether a leader is charismatic or not, it depends when he or she is able to catch the vote, because charisma is tested by them.
To our web users, we have launched a request so they could ask you a question. I would like to put to you just one question from an Indian man, a young man called Tanmay Kumar. He's a student in economics and lives in Delhi. And he would like to ask you, has the way politics was done in India changed over time?
Every election in India is a landmark election in the sense that it has thrown new leaders. It has thrown new issues. It has addressed new problems which the growing economy, growing country, growing society faces.
I wonder if I could now tap into your incredible historical perspective. If anyone has lived through all the pages of India after Gandhi, you have. We don't have time for a history lesson, but just tell me one thing. If the founding fathers of India, Gandhi, Nehru, were here today, would they be reasonably content with what they see?
Of course, because when we became independent, there was disunity. When India became independent, hardly we could manufacture anything. But the manufacturing base which we have developed over the years is substantial. Rate of literacy was less than 1/3, and today it is more than 3/4. Therefore, these are the areas where the founding fathers would surely feel satisfied, but at the same time, they will feel not satisfied because we are to reach much greater height.
Do you have any regrets?
No.
And what keeps you awake at night today?
I would like to see India takes its rightful place in the Committee of Nations as one of the most prosperous, developed country which protects human rights, which includes the development of one and all, which is the old maxim of our society.